I was walking down the street, my purse securely clutched under my arm, my mind wandering to the endless to-do list I had waiting at home. I had just come from a doctor's appointment that left me drained, my mind foggy with 1,000 thoughts, none of them particularly pleasant. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the city as I walked. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening, just a quick stop at the market to pick up some groceries, and then back to my quiet apartment. But then, just as I reached the corner of 5th and Elm, everything changed. I felt a sharp tug on my shoulder, and before I could even register what was happening, I saw the woman, young, quick, dart away from me with my purse in her hand. "Wait! Stop!" I screamed, my heart pounding in my chest, but it was too late. She was already disappearing into the crowd. I froze for a moment, disbelief taking over. My purse, my whole life was gone in an instant. Inside it was more than just money. It was a picture of my grandmother, the last gift she ever gave me before she passed away. It was a locket, an heirloom, passed down through generations. It was the only thing I had left from my family. And now it was gone. I quickly shook myself out of the daze. "Someone help! Please!" I shouted. But no one seemed to hear me, or maybe they just didn't care. My pulse raced, and I looked around, spotting a man walking nearby who seemed to be paying attention. "Excuse me," I called out to him. "She took my purse. Please, I need help." The man, tall, well-built, wearing a dark blue jacket, looked up and immediately broke into a run, chasing after the thief without a second thought. I stood there helpless, torn between running after them and staying where I was in case the thief doubled back. Suddenly he was back, breathing heavily, his face a mixture of frustration and determination. "She got away," he said, his voice tight. "But don't worry, we can catch her." "How?" I asked, my voice trembling with anxiety. "We'll go to the police, file a report, and see if we can track her down," he said. "I know this sounds bad, but we have to stay calm." I felt a lump form in my throat. "You don't understand. You have no idea what was in that purse. Please, we can't let her get away." He looked at me, his expression softening with understanding. "I know it's hard. Let's just go to the police, okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed that a report would bring back what was lost. What? At the police station, I sat across from Officer James, my hands clenched in my lap, my mind still reeling. Officer James was young, maybe in his mid-30s, with short-cropped hair and a serious look on his face. He had the demeanor of someone who had seen it all, but there was a glimmer of kindness in his eyes. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I understand this is important to you, but right now we're stretched pretty thin. I can take your report, but honestly, a purse theft on a busy bus doesn't make it to the top of the list." I could feel the frustration rising inside me, a pressure building in my chest. "No, you don't understand," I said, standing up suddenly. "It's not just a purse. It's a piece of my history, something that's irreplaceable to me. I can't lose it." "Ma'am, I believe you," he said, his tone soft, "but I'm afraid we have bigger cases to deal with. It's not that we don't care. It's just the reality of our situation." I felt my throat close up. "Please," I whispered, "please help me. That locket, I can't lose it." He sat back in his chair, looking at me with sympathy, but there was nothing he could do. "I'll do my best," he said, "but if we're being realistic, it's just stuff. It can be replaced." I couldn't control the tears that welled up in my eyes. How could he say that? How could he think that an object like a locket, a symbol of my family, could be just stuff? My grandmother's voice echoed in my head. "Remember who you are. Never forget where you come from." I had no idea how I would survive without it. The days following were filled with a kind of numbness. I spent hours retracing my steps, hoping against hope that the thief had dropped the purse, or maybe even forgotten it somewhere. But each attempt left me feeling more and more defeated. The locket wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was my connection to a life I had tried to leave behind, a life I couldn't forget. I called Officer James several times, checking on the progress of the investigation, but each time he sounded more and more distant. It was as if my problem wasn't important enough to matter. I started to wonder if he even remembered the report. Then one evening, as I sat at home, sorting through the mountain of bills on my kitchen table, my phone rang. "Ms. Henson?" It was Officer James' voice. "We found her." I jumped to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. "You found the thief?" "Yes, we tracked her down using the AirTag you had hidden in your purse." I couldn't believe it. There was a sense of relief, a faint glimmer of hope. But there was also fear that I'd find something worse inside the purse, something I wasn't ready for. I had to know what was inside. Boo. We arrived at the location, a dilapidated building in an alleyway near the outskirts of town. The smell of garbage and stale air hit me before I even stepped inside. The room was dimly lit with peeling paint on the walls and a heavy silence that pressed down on us. "She's in here," Officer James said, leading me into a small, grimy apartment. The woman who had stolen my purse was sitting on a threadbare couch, her face hard and unremorseful. I recognized her immediately. The thief, young, frail, and desperate looking. "Where is it?" I demanded, my voice cold. "Where's my purse?" She didn't speak at first, but I could see her eyes flicker toward the corner of the room. Officer James walked over to the spot, pulling out my purse with a look of disgust. I reached out for it, barely able to control my shaking hands as I clutched it to my chest. I knew without looking that the locket was inside. I could feel it in my gut, that small piece of comfort. But then, as I opened it, something caught my eye. A folded piece of paper carefully tucked inside the purse. I pulled it out and unfolded it, my fingers trembling as I read the words. I took this purse because I had nothing left. I was desperate. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I needed to survive. Please forgive me. I looked up at the thief, who now seemed smaller, more vulnerable. My anger melted into confusion. I wanted to yell at her. I wanted to blame her for what she had taken from me. But instead, all I could do was stare at her, at the desperation in her eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. We left the apartment and walked back to the car. Officer James was quiet beside me. The city lights blurred as we passed, but I wasn't seeing the city anymore. I was thinking about what had happened, about how I had spent all these days focused on a purse, on an object. But it wasn't the object that mattered. It was the memories, the connections, the people. And suddenly I realized something. I didn't need the locket to remember my grandmother. I didn't need the locket to remember my son or to carry the weight of my past. I carried it with me every day in my heart. When I looked up at Officer James, he was staring at me as if waiting for me to say something. I think I can forgive her," I said softly. "I think I understand why she did it." He gave me a small, understanding nod, his eyes soft with empathy. "I think you're right." Yeah. It was in that moment, with the city lights twinkling around me, that I understood the true power of forgiveness. Not just for the thief, but for myself. It wasn't just the locket I had been searching for. It was peace, and I had finally found it. The days that followed felt strange. Like walking through a dream that hadn't quite ended. I kept replaying the events in my mind, the way everything had unfolded so quickly, so unexpectedly. I was still processing the fact that I had found my son's locket and had also forgiven the woman who stole from me. It was like I had found peace, but with that peace came an unsettling feeling, one I couldn't quite place. I spent the next few days at home, trying to sort through the emotions swirling in my head. I would find myself staring out the window, watching the world go by, lost in my thoughts. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about the thief. I didn't know what had driven her to steal my purse, but I understood desperation. I had lived it. I had once been desperate, with no choices and nowhere to turn. And though I had the luxury of family and resources now, I knew that feeling all too well. My phone rang one afternoon while I was cleaning the kitchen. I glanced at the screen, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw Officer James's name. I hadn't heard from him in a few days. "Hello?" I answered, trying to steady my breath. "Miss Henson, it's Officer James. I wanted to check in and see how you're doing after everything." I was surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. I'm doing better, I think. Thank you for asking." There was a pause on the line before he spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. And well, I know this might sound strange, but the woman who took your purse, we've learned a bit more about her. Her name is Jessica, and she's been in and out of trouble for years. But what struck me was when we did a little more digging, we found out she had been trying to get her life together. She's been working 2 jobs and trying to get out of the cycle she's been in." I felt a tight knot form in my chest. "You mean she's not just some thief?" "No, she's not. She's been trying, and that's why I wanted to call you. We found something else while searching her apartment." I froze. "What did you find?" "Well, we found an old picture of her with a little boy. It was a family photo, but she had crossed out the boy's face. At first, we thought it was strange, but then we learned something important. That boy was her son. My heart started to race. Her son? What do you mean? What does this have to do with me? I don't know yet, but it seems that Jessica had given her son up for adoption years ago, and the locket you found, Mrs. Henson, it's the same locket that she had once given to her son. She's been carrying around the other half of it, just like you. She must have recognized yours when she saw it in your purse. I felt the room spin, my mind racing to make sense of what he was saying. Are you telling me that the woman who stole from me is my son's birth mother? It seems like it. And now, well, we're trying to piece everything together. I was in shock. My emotions were all over the place, confusion, disbelief, anger, and something else. I didn't know what it was. But why did she steal from me? Why didn't she just talk to me? If she knew, if she recognized the locket, why go through all of this? That's something only Jessica can explain, Mrs. Henson. But I think there's more to this story than we realize. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't shake the thought of Jessica. My mind kept going back to the woman I had met at the police station, the same woman who had stolen my purse, the same woman who, in some twisted way, might be connected to my son. It felt like a dream, like a story that didn't make sense, and yet here I was, living it. I spent the rest of the week pacing around my apartment, trying to figure out how to handle all of this. If Jessica really was my son's birth mother, if that was the truth, what did that mean for me? What did that mean for my son, who I had given up years ago? Would he even want to know about his birth mother? Would he want to know me? I didn't have the answers. All I had was the same aching emptiness I had lived with for years. The emptiness of knowing I couldn't be with my son. The emptiness of having lost him. The phone rang again, and I nearly dropped it in my haste to answer. Hello? Miss Henson, it's Officer James. I think it's time you meet with Jessica. We've arranged something. She wants to talk to you. I felt a rush of panic. What? Meet her? Are you sure this is a good idea? She's been through a lot, Miss Henson, but we think it's the right thing to do. She's agreed to speak with you and answer your questions, and we think you might be able to help her, and maybe help yourself in the process. I didn't know if I was ready for that. I didn't know if I was ready to meet the woman who had taken so much from me, even if it was by mistake. But something in me knew that this was a moment I couldn't walk away from. It was the first step towards something I had been running from for years. Okay, I'll meet her, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. The place was small, tucked away in an alley with soft lighting and the faint hum of quiet conversation. I sat at a corner table, nervously stirring my coffee, my hands trembling as I waited for Jessica to arrive. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. Her face was drawn, tired, as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders. She was younger than I had expected, no more than 30, but there was something about her, the way she carried herself, that made me feel like I was looking at a different version of myself. A younger me, full of mistakes and regrets, desperately trying to make up for lost time. She sat down across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Finally, she broke the silence. You must hate me, she said quietly. I stole from you, and now I'm here, asking for forgiveness, but I don't know if I deserve it. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I had the right to forgive her, but what I did know was that I understood. I understood more than she knew. No, I said, my voice soft. I don't hate you. I don't know you, but I can't hate you. I've been where you are, trying to make sense of a life that doesn't seem fair, trying to hold on to anything that feels real. I get it. Jessica looked at me with wide eyes as if she hadn't expected this response. You do? She asked, her voice trembling. I nodded. I gave up my son when he was a baby. I didn't have a choice. His father was dangerous, and I couldn't protect him. So I had to let him go. I gave him up so he could have a chance at a better life. The room fell silent again as Jessica absorbed my words. I didn't want to do it, I continued, my voice thick with emotion. But sometimes we make decisions we think are right, and they haunt us forever. Jessica wiped her eyes, her face crumpling as she fought back tears. I didn't want to abandon my son either, she whispered. But I thought I had no other choice. I thought if I kept him, he'd grow up the same way I did, without a chance, without hope, and now... She paused, swallowing hard. Now I'm here, and I've ruined everything. I ruined my own life. I ruined his. I reached out, placing my hand over hers. The words caught in my throat. We did what we thought was best at the time, I said softly. But we can't change the past. We can only try to make things right from here on out. Beto. As we sat together in that cafe, talking about the past, the pain, and the mistakes we had both made, I realized something. This wasn't just about finding my son or forgiving Jessica. It was about healing. It was about understanding that the decisions we make don't have to define us forever. And maybe, just maybe, we could still find a way forward together. After that day at the cafe, everything started to feel different. It was as if a door had opened, and for the first time in years, I wasn't alone behind it. Jessica and I started meeting regularly. At first, it was just small steps, talking about our lives, our choices, our losses. But with each conversation, a connection grew. We had both made terrible decisions, decisions we couldn't undo, but we also shared something deeper, something we couldn't ignore. Jessica's story echoed my own in ways I hadn't expected. She had been living in a world of survival, just like I had, and I found myself drawn to her in a way I couldn't explain. She wasn't the enemy, not really. She was a woman just trying to navigate a life that had been handed to her in pieces, struggling to find a way to make things right, and I knew exactly how that felt. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky and the cafe quieted, Jessica spoke again. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked, her voice small, almost fragile. "Do you ever wonder if he's okay? If he knows about you?" I didn't need to ask who she meant. "My son," I whispered, the pain in my chest tightening. "Every day. I think about him every day." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the years between us pressing down. I hadn't seen my son since that fateful day I gave him up for adoption, and even though I had built a life, the hole in my heart never quite healed. Not a day went by when I didn't wonder where he was, who he had become. I I don't even know if he's alive," I added quietly, the truth sinking in like a stone. "I don't know if he ever found out the truth, if he ever hated me for what I did." Jessica's hand reached across the table and I took it, not even realizing I was holding my breath. "I can't tell you what's going to happen," she said, her voice steady, "but I can tell you one thing. You made the hardest decision of your life, and I can see it, how much it still hurts you. He'll understand one day. Maybe he already does." Her words struck me with a strange sense of hope. I wanted to believe them. I needed to. A week passed before I heard anything more. Officer James called me one morning while I was on my way to work. "Ms. Henson, I've got something for you," he said, his voice firm yet soft. "We've tracked down your son. He's living in the city, and he wants to meet you." I nearly dropped my phone. My heart raced, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. "What? Where? When? How?" I stammered, desperate for any information. "Take a deep breath," Officer James said, his tone reassuring. "He's at the adoption agency right now. He's been waiting for you to contact him. He said he's been looking for you his whole life. He's ready, Ms. Henson." I wanted to hang up and run, to go straight to him, but I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. What if he didn't want me? What if he hated me for abandoning him? What if, after all this time, he didn't see me as his mother anymore? "Are you sure?" I whispered, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "Are you sure he's ready to see me?" "I am," Officer James assured me. "I'll be here to help. Take your time, but don't wait too long." I closed my eyes, taking a few steadying breaths, my hand clutching the phone tightly. For the first time in years, I felt something other than pain. I felt hope. "Tom?" I arrived at the adoption agency an hour later, my stomach in knots, my heart thumping in my chest. The building was nothing special, a small, nondescript office tucked away on a quiet street. I walked inside and the receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "I'm here to see my son," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I've been waiting for this moment for so long." The receptionist nodded and motioned toward a hallway. "He's waiting in the back room. Take your time." I swallowed hard, forcing my feet to move forward, one step at a time. I could feel the weight of the years pressing down on me, but I couldn't turn back now. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. As I walked into the back room, I saw him. He was sitting with his back to me, his dark hair falling in front of his face. He looked so much like the boy I had once held in my arms, but so much older, so much more real. "Is it really you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He turned around slowly, his eyes wide with surprise, and then, in an instant, he was on his feet, his arms open wide, and I felt him pull me into a hug. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I've waited so long for this. I knew I would find you someday." Tears filled my eyes as I held him tight. He was here, he was real. And after all these years, I had found my son. "I never stopped thinking about you," I whispered into his hair. Never. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, holding each other, feeling the weight of the past slip away with every breath. It didn't matter that we had lost so much time. What mattered was that we were together now. After a while, we pulled apart, both of us wiping our eyes, trying to steady our breath. He looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and tenderness. "You don't know how much this means to me," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I've been searching for you my whole life, and now I can finally understand." I nodded, my heart full of so many emotions. "I never wanted to leave you," I said softly. "I did what I thought was best, but it's been killing me ever since." He shook his head, a small smile forming on his face. "I know, I understand now, and I'm just glad we're here, together." The next few months were filled with new beginnings. My son, whose name was Michael, and I slowly rebuilt our relationship, one conversation at a time. It wasn't easy. There were times when the past threatened to creep in, when the weight of our history felt too heavy to bear. But we were both determined to make it work. Jessica, too, became a part of our lives. She and I met often, sharing stories of our struggles, our fears, and the mistakes we had made. And through it all, we found something we hadn't expected, a kind of healing that came from understanding one another's pain. I never did get back the locket from my grandmother, but in the end, I realized that the true treasure wasn't a piece of jewelry. It was the connection I had finally found with my son and the forgiveness that came with it. And that was all I needed. I'm so glad you enjoyed the story. Life is filled with moments of heartbreak and healing, and sometimes the most unexpected connections bring the greatest peace. What do you think about the decisions these characters made? Have you ever experienced a reunion or forgiveness that changed everything? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your own stories, or tell me how you would have reacted in their shoes. Let's keep the conversation going.